Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. And I'm going to take you to Tibet with a special focus on the mushrooms. And it's amazing how important mushrooms are in contemporary Tibet. But, you know, I'm not going to just show mushrooms, but also a little bit give a context of the environment and the culture and so on. So this summer we were very fortunate. It was sunny for 2 weeks, which of course you all as mushroom hunters know it's not as fortunate as you would think. So first time in the summer, I don't know, I've been there maybe 15 summers or something like that. The first time there was hardly any mushrooms, or there was only dried up mushrooms in the forest. In July they had a record of rainfall, and then in August they had these really dry days, but we could see the mountains. And Minyagonka, many people are not aware of this mountain range. That's the biggest mountain range, the highest outside of the Himalaya Karakoram. And look at this, I mean, nearly 25,000 feet peak, and you know, it's, I don't know how many, it's geologically quite separate from the Himalayas. The Himalayas is just a narrow band of mountains. Many people think the Tibetan plateau is the Himalayas, but it's not so. The Himalayas is a narrow band of mountains that's maybe 60 miles wide and not, you know, 1,000 miles or so as the Tibetan plateau. And then, of course, everybody associates with Tibet Lhasa, the Potala, and so on. There's a great diversity. It's not just high alpine meadows, but it's forests and very diverse landscape. So here you see the Tibetan Plateau, huge area, about the size of Australia or something like that, or the western United States, Rocky Mountain states to the Pacific without California, somebody calculated. And there you have Lhasa, and then most of my work I'm presenting is here from these areas. So the southwest of the Tibetan Plateau, you have a lot of precipitation over here, maybe, you know, 40 inches, 1,000 millimeters, maybe even 2,000 millimeters annual rain, and up here you're down to 1 inch a year, 25 millimeters. So you have a strong gradient in regard of moisture, biodiversity, and so on, high altitude desert, and here you have this is the most biodiverse area in the temperate vegetation zone on the globe. So there's no other spot on this globe where you have more conifers, and you know, many of the alpine species have 100 different species, and of course that applies also for mushrooms, wildlife, and so on. So this is in the summer, you know, usually there's clouds at night, there's rain, days are often sunny, and then once in a while you get lucky and you see over one of these mountains, and like Yala Pelri is right above the Tsangpo Gorge, and on the other side you have Namche Barwa that is still even a little higher, and between these two 24,000 feet mountains you have a river running at 6,000 feet. I mean, it's an incredible gorge, and hardly anybody gets in there because it's so steep and there's no road or anything like that. It's just steep. And then there's these valleys around here, and having grown up in Bavaria, Germany, you know, and it just looks like in the Alps. You have these farming villages and fields around, and the conifer forest. The only difference is what you can see here in the front is there's an oak element, and in the Alps there's no oaks that go up in the mountains. It's a lowland species, and these are evergreen. And there is a development project. They encourage local farmers to take tourists in. So you can stay in farmhouses, or for 1 night or 2 nights we can stay in a farmhouse. You know, we so far had luck. Whenever we get into this area, then we can go there, and there you see a bag of morels. And the morel picking, well, I talk about it a little later, but the prices of these morels were they're as high as in the Western world, because it all goes to the Western market. And out in these woods around this place, there you see the forest. It's typical conifer elements. You have a large tree, you have the evergreen oaks, which is maybe, you know, not exotic up here in Colorado, where you have a lot of oaks in the mountains, but it's spruce, fir, aspen, juniper, you know, it's the usual suspect. So I feel at home in these forests, although everything is a little different and you have different species, but it's very familiar to the feeling of the forest is very familiar to me, like in the Pacific Northwest or in the European Alps. And here I have a variety of boletes. That's probably Boletes reticulosus. I'm going to show a close-up, and I wasn't able to figure out what this red port bolete is. There's reticulatus. And so we were very happy to find these nice boletes in the forest and pick them, and already tried a few in the forest. Since growing up, whenever I find fresh boletes, I like to eat a little bit. The king boletes are one of the few boletes you can eat without cooking. Not everybody, and if you can't handle it, it's not a big problem, just a little unease in your stomach. So we take them with us in the kitchen of the farmhouse, and there's Drolma, our host, and her grandpa Sunam, and this is Chimpa, my friend in Lhasa who I work with. And so we slice up the boletes. We're all excited, gonna cook up boletes. In a Tibetan farmhouse, there's butter, there's onions, you know. Something in China, you know, you don't get butter in a Chinese household, right? So, and we bring our Great Wall red wine so we can deglaze it nicely. So we want to cook up these boletes, and Sunam and Droma start talking, and finally Chimpa comes over. They seem a little uncomfortable with what's going on, and Chimpa says, "They think you eat poisonous mushrooms. These are poisonous mushrooms." And I said, "Oh, no, they're king boletes." And I peel my shirt off and show the t-shirt of the Cascade Mycological Society in Eugene with a nice king bolete, right? No, this is good stuff. And no, this is a poisonous mushroom. I get out my Japanese mushroom book, you know, Fungi of Japan, and show them here this bolete, and see there's a green light, there's a green dot there that means edible. And Sunam says, the grandpa, "I've been living here for 96 years, and this is a poisonous mushroom." You know, what'd you do in such a situation? You stay in somebody's home and, you know, you're frying up poisonous mushrooms. So, I've already eaten few in the forest and didn't feel anything. So we said, okay, well, we'll just fry it up, and we try a tiny bit, and then we see how we feel. And so we fried it all up, and the next, and it was great, and it was really hard to stop ourselves eating it, but we had promised it, and of course there was no problems. And before I ran into finding king boletes, and the locals told me they're poisonous. And I realized that in many traditional systems you have two classes of mushrooms, edible and poisonous. There's no edible, we don't know poisonous. It's edible and poisonous. So if they don't know about a mushroom, it's right away in the poisonous group. And king boletes in several areas in Tibet fall into this category because people just didn't eat them traditionally. So I haven't had that experience in one place where I then took the supposedly poisonous bolete to the next market town and looked what was on the market, and was exactly the same species, you know. Okay, that's, you know, when they say poisonous, it doesn't, that's the local level of knowledge, not necessarily the experience. So, well, we saved it for the morning, and in the morning, Droma made flatbread, and we rolled up the boletes in our wine sauce. We rolled them up in the breakfast, and it was excellent. The next year when I came back, I fried them up again and offered them Droma, and she would eat a tiny piece, but it wasn't like, oh, you guys eat it, we can eat it. It was still, you know, a stigmatized mushroom. And it's dealt on the markets, you know. I mean, Italy by now, 10 years ago already, half of the dried mushrooms coming out of Italy already come from China, including lots of porcini, and many of them come from the Tibetan areas. Kunming is the big trading town and attracts all the mushrooms, you know, from the Tibetan areas, and they get exported to Italy, and you might go in a store and buy Italian porcini, and, you know, there might be Tibetan porcini too. This is one of them. There could be reticuloceps. I mean, look at the reticulation of the stem and the cap. There was actually a fourth one right behind these three. Really odd cluster of porcinis. Then a whole bunch of red port ones. So if I key that out with an American, you know, book, then it is Boletes flammans. And but a lot of the Chinese Chinese mushroom books use European names and American names, just books they could get a handle of, and everybody's copying from each other. So they have all these names, many of them we can relate to, and then a whole bunch of newly described stuff, but there needs to be a lot more taxonomic work to be done. So then you see quick blue staining, that's a Tibetan R, the first sound. First is sound and then materia manifests out of sound in their cosmology. I came across this big bolete that had a pinkish cap and I had no idea what it was. And then the next year I saw these ones on the market and then I found them under the trees and I realized this is the young version. So this is my favorite oriental extremist, this Lexinum with this incredible brown tube layer. And I think it's an oak associate, but very high also bolete diversity. And chanterelles, there's not so many chanterelles out there, and many of them are quite fragile, so there's no chanterelle export going to Europe, and people have the habit of not cleaning them when they pick them. So it's a big mess, and a whole bunch of species seem quite fragile, so nobody's exporting fresh chanterelles yet from Tibet. But the people know it, the people love it. They call it sersha or sershamu, the golden or yellow mushroom, which is a name that is also applied for the most famous grassland mushroom. So local names. There's not a single book that would have Tibetan mushroom names or so. You know, there's a few Tibetan mycologists, but there's some books like Mushrooms of Tibet where there's a, you know, in any publication on Tibet, Chinese authors do, they gotta get this fig leaf the fig leaf Tibetan author on there. And then I finally found the author of that book, Mushrooms in Tibet, and met him, and I don't know anything about mushrooms. I just happened to be in the same institute, and they needed a Tibetan name on there. And then you might have seen this name before, Amanita hemibartha. Of course, it's not used here anymore, Jacksonii, but it was first described in the Himalayas, so that's the Himalayan Caesar, and that is a prized mushroom. Also, I also heard for this mushroom in the same village, oh, this is a poisonous mushroom, but you find it on the markets, and it's usually as valuable as boletes or a little bit more. And boletes fresh on the market, maybe a pound is about $2. And the matsutake would be maybe $4 or $5 a pound. So the price is already influenced by export, but it's not as high as matsutake, which all goes to Japan. Look at this size of huge. So this is a Chinese girl somewhere on the road, along the road in a little shed selling mushrooms. All along the road you see people selling mushrooms, and you know, I mean, the Chinese really love mushrooms, Tibetans love mushrooms, but of course the market is down in China. You go in the backcountry and then you know, you still get a very different feeling than in the towns, and this is a sacred lake. Drakzo has a couple names, and sacred peaks. Any impressive peak in Tibet is sacred, and that's pre-Buddhist shamanistic belief systems where there's mountain spirits. And in one place I saw where a young man of a village, it was the annual festival, gets in a trance, gets possessed by the mountain spirit, and he runs down the whole mountain. It wasn't a mountain like this. He runs down the whole mountain and I mean, is clearly possessed and has this 15 other young men around him who try to make sure he doesn't hurt himself or hurt anybody else, and foam from the mouth, and it's just crazy, you know. And then he gets treated and food and drinks and so on, and you know, and then, okay, time for you to go back to the mountain and be kind to us. So really wild how these ancient traditions still live into the 21st century. And here in this lake is this little sacred island with a monastery, dates back to the 12th century, Traksumtso, and this is the 21st century. And here come the busloads of Chinese tourists, but they show up usually after 10 or 11 and leave by 4, and you go before or after that, and you have you have quite a nice peaceful time on that island. I found 5 different species of orchids just on that island, and a couple of boletes. And another monastery not far away, there's these macaques. There's several species of macaques who live in the conifer forests, you know, hang out in the snow in the winter and so on. And this was a pretty smart guy. He found that jacket hanging from a tree, and he went in every single pocket and was checking the pockets. However, he wasn't retrieving his hand as what we usually do. He just pulled it out and ripped each pocket while he was searching. That's a white-eared pheasant, and they hang often in the winter. They come down into the agricultural areas and in the monasteries, so people feed them with grain, and you can see a flock of 50 of them. In the summer, they're much harder to see. Beautiful birds, incredible diversity of pheasants, one of the highest in the world in southwest China, East Tibet. Usually see 1 or 2 on a trip, or at least, grouse and so on. And orchids, in July is prime orchid season, and one of the, 10 species of lady slippers out there. Here, the Himalayan lady slipper, and of course it's always very lucky when you find such a nice cluster. And habenarias, they like it warm temperate, really, these filigrane flowers, and takes me always quite a while to key out these orchids. And then high up in the grasslands, Sausarea, many of them are covered in their own wool-like fine hairs, but that one just down on the ground, high altitude adaptations. There's one, I think we do have some in North America too. In Europe, there's a medicinal in China, very famous, Sausarea medusa, the medusa head. And it's like packed in a woolly, high altitude adaptation, and they get maybe up to that height. But I got to look up, see what's the closest in English. Yeah, they don't look like that usually. They go above ground. So this is something that adapted to living on the ground, just like this one here. That's in the aster family, Sorocerus gillii, and you already find your mandalas there in the grasslands. Up in the grasslands, we are a traditional Tibetan nomad tent. They are on the way out. The plastics are just lighter, really waterproof, cheaper, and these hand-woven yak hair tents are very heavy and expensive, unless, of course, you can make it for yourself, but it takes a long time. And they're not 100% waterproof, So people like a waterproof tent is nice progress. And up in the grasslands, the most beloved mushroom is, again, a cercia, a golden mushroom. And this is Flocolaria luteovirens, which is usually tree associated. We have in Colorado pretty similar Flocolaria americana, what's the first? Straminea americana. And you find in the poplar fir forests or aspen fir forests. And in Europe, it's also tree associated, but out in the grasslands, there is no trees. So, all its relatives, it's clearly ectomycorrhizal, but there it has apparently jumped to some grassland species, some herbs or some sedges. Carex has ectomycorrhizal associations, and the people working on these grass fungal associations. And when I first came there, you could buy it for $1 or so a pound. Now it's about $8 a pound. And what happened is the Chinese discovered it. And everything coming from Tibet is medicine, right, in China. And so these things get suddenly this immense value, and in a few years there's a hype in China, and then prices go up. And of course it's good for the people to generate an income, but then they don't enjoy it themselves so much anymore, because why would I eat these expensive things? I can get money for it. All the Tibetans still eat their agaricus. Here the meadow mushroom, and when I talk with Tibetans about mushrooms, everybody starts telling about how they eat this mushroom, and it has nice. Well, the common name is kasha, white mushroom, but then it's also called trukdak shamu, which means thunder dragon mushroom, and that's a reference to it grows after the thunderstorms, right? And it can fruit. It starts fruiting maybe in April, May, and it goes till winter comes in. It's in the low valleys. Species of agaricus, right? Not campestris here, which might not even be campestris. Even in Europe, we learned by DNA they have 2 different species they call campestris, and it's not out in North America, DNA says now. So anyways, but So it can grow in the low valleys, and it goes up to 16, 17, 18,000 feet. And it's very popular. And the way you cook it is you take the mushroom, break off the stem, you wash the outside of the cap, and then you put it on your fire or your coals. Here, electric coil. This is the only source of heating in a Tibetan house these days, when there's electricity, right? Otherwise, they have a little fire going, but it's not like the space gets really heated up. And then you put the cap of the mushroom down, and you fill it with the sliced up stems, and you add a little bit of butter, Tibetan butter, salt, and tsampa. Tsampa is roasted ground barley. And that's the main carb staple for the Tibetans traditionally. Tsampa is what is eaten 3 times a day. You mix it with your butter tea, and you have a dough-like thing, and then you eat it. And here they put the tsampa in the caps with the butter and the salt, and then the whole thing is cooking in its own juice, and in a great dish. Ah, ya Padu. Kasha, remare. Kasha. The view from the rooftop of Torch's mother. So Losang is washing Kashamo, Agaricus campestris, and only washing them from the top, not the gills, otherwise there's too much water. And Dechen, his wife, is assisting here. And then we're gonna cook them in traditional Tibetan style with butter and tsampa, roasted ground barley flour.
I'm Indian chef.
So Duchi is operating the electricity. This is a high voltage job. Up there the power comes back on because Duchi is operating it so graciously. Fearless. Spreading the butter a little bit so it's going everywhere. Of course this should be, traditionally that's been done on a real stove and not a ceramic electric wire stove. And that one cap that was a little bit riper, that goes much quicker.
Money.
So now that there was some tsampa added in the process. It's served well there. When I thought of the photo, there was only 3 left, We've eaten we've eaten already the rest. And these boys have heard that we were interested in mushrooms when we came to the house, and we're going to cook them up, and they disappeared, and half an hour later they came with 2 bags full of agaricus. So I mean, this is in societies where people love mushrooms. It's the little kids already who know mushrooms. I mean, I learned mushroom hunting when I was 4 or 5 years old. Not that I know species, but as a kid you can discern what a king bolete is, what a chanterelle is. You don't need to join a mushroom club and know what a spore print is, right? I mean, you just learn from your parents, and of course you leave the final ID to them. But so that's just in a society where people are not, where there's mushroom knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Okay, so cordyceps, I'm sure all of you have heard about cordyceps, and Yertsa Gumbu, the Tibetan name, and you see there's a fungus growing out of the head of a larva here, of a ghost moth larvae. And before I go really into the Tibetan caterpillar fungus, I show a couple pictures from the Amazon rainforest where there's much more cordyceps diversity. Here, Cordyceps leucostiphilia, so that cordyceps has an inclination of digesting locusts or grasshoppers, and you see how the fruiting bodies grow out of the body of that locust, which at that point there's not much left inside the exoskeleton. It's all mycelium. The mushroom already has digested the whole insect, and what you just see is an exoskeleton filled with mycelium. And of course, people working on that since decades to control locust swarms. Supposedly that has been used already, and they just spray the spores, and you can stop a locust swarm by infecting the locust with the spores of cordyceps or an anamorph, and that way you can control this pest without impacting any other organisms. And here in another weird thing out of the Amazon, Cordyceps cylindrica, for the shape of the spore-building tissue here, it looks very cylindric. And down on the bottom, this is a cocoon from a spider. I opened it on the right side, and you see there's a spider in there, and which is going through its molting stages. And that's the moment where the cordyceps can come in and digest the spiders and feeds of it. And on the lower right, you see the sporulation here, the spores, ASCII spores coming out. And then a couple more here before going back to Tibet. This is in Colombia. Last year I went for the first time to Colombia, or this year, and next year I will organize also a tour in late March, early April to go to Colombia, where I made this great friend, Tatiana San Juan, who is a cordyceps expert for tropical cordyceps. So quite exciting. And so here there's all kinds of Cordyceps variabilis, which you also can find, I think, up here on the East Coast, and then another spider, Ophiocordyceps, Caloceroides, and Isaria tenuipes anamorph. Okay, back to Tibet. So the name of the Tibetan caterpillar fungus is Yartsa gumbu, which means summer grass winter worm. And you've seen, well, the winter worm is pretty evident, and that you would think this fruiting body of a cordyceps that is maybe a couple inch long could be a grass. But look down here, the Cobresia fruiting body looks quite a lot like the caterpillar fungus fruiting body. So good name. And up here around tree line, wherever these rhododendrons are, there used to be a forest. Tibetans are not that big on forests. They like grazing grounds and not forests. So a lot of areas have lost the forest in the last 2,000 to 4,000 years. And in the Tibetan world, this is an original text translated by my twin brother from the 15th century, something like 1480 or so. And I mean, it starts out with this nice line: in this world, sexual bliss is the most marvelous of all earthly pleasures, the essence of enjoyment of all the senses. I still have to find out if the Tibetan doctor, Tsukha Namni Dorje, if he was officially a monk or not. But there is, in Tibetan Buddhism, there is not such a anti-sex bias like in Catholicism or so, that sex is a sin or anything like that. Yes, it's a big distraction and can cause a lot of trouble, but it's part of the human condition. Anyway, so this text describes where it grows, how it grows, and how you can make a little concoction out of it. And here there's some modern applications and modern research on cordyceps as a medicinal. Interesting, in 2010 and then in 2012, another paper by out of Nottingham University was looking into cordycepine, one of the active ingredients, and how it is blocking cancer cell reproduction. So they have clearly shown how that works, but there's no clinical tests on using cordyceps to stop cancer. But in China, there's a wide belief that you can stop cancer with using cordyceps. And then a new drug, Gilenya, for multiple sclerosis, came out a year or 2 years ago, and that was developed from Cordyceps sinclairii. And everybody's familiar with the functions of Cordyceps subsessilis, which is used in cephalosporin when you get a heart or liver transplant to suppress your immune system. So you don't want to take that if you're healthy, because the last thing you want is to suppress your immune system. But if you have autoimmune diseases where your immune system overreacts, it is really helpful using some of these things. So, I mean, we don't have the time to go into all of this, but just to give you an idea that, you know, there is some basis to the medicinal claims, because, of course, the medicinal claims is what drives the whole cordyceps phenomena in Tibet. And here the distribution map, I showed you before, a map of Tibet. Up here, everything way too dry, high altitude desert, but this, you find the cordyceps in the areas where you have good grasslands, you know, fertile grasslands, and also a little bit in the shrublands, and historical and recent deforestation definitely has enlarged the habitat for caterpillar fungus. And that was the map. National Geographic had an article in August last year, and that was based on my map, and I ended up being their one of the scientific advisors. I had offered them basically the same article they just published already 7 years ago, and then again 3 years ago, and you know, nobody ever replies. And so they last year then wrote their own article, which, you know, my proposal is basically the summary of what was published then. And here, Tibetan collectors, that was a picture I took in 1999. You know, everybody's still quite traditionally dressed, and it can snow for a day, and then you can't collect any caterpillar fungus. It's too tiny, it's just under the snow. You have to wait till the snow melts, but usually it's gone in a day or in an afternoon. We are in the subtropics, so you know, a lot of the Tibetan plateau starts comparable south of the US border, like northern Mexico and so on. So the sun has a lot of power in Tibet, and then you have the altitude too. But it's cold, and so now they have these double-walled tents with a nice oven inside, and, you know, one season of collection you can afford your motorcycle. And, you know, as a Tibetan male, I'm sure you can't pick up a lady anymore without having your own motorcycle, you know, gotta go with the crowd. And back then when I took this picture, I didn't realize that there was already all these people here going up the slopes and collecting. So that's how it happens, and people are high up in the grasslands. This is maybe 15,000 feet, and we met this mother with her 3 daughters. We met in several times again out there, and now they they opened a little roadside restaurant on one of the routes we're driving, which is a day's drive away, where they collect their caterpillar fungus. And so they go each May, June, go up there 6 weeks and collect caterpillar fungus, and then use that money in a nice way as a seed money for developing their own business. So there's no shortage of cash on the Tibetan plateau. This is the little hole here with which you dig, and some places give a definition how big the hole can be to minimize environmental impact. There's some crazy calculations out how many thousands of hectares each year get destroyed by digging caterpillar fungus. But, you know, I went through these numbers, and they had there was a mistake of a factor 1,000 or 100. Anyways, so yes, there's environmental impact. These people live high up in the mountains and use the last little bit of woody vegetation to keep themselves warm and to cook. And you know, all of Tibet basically in May and June, everybody who can is up in the mountains collecting caterpillar fungus. I mean, the towns are pretty empty because everybody is making as much money as they can in these 4 to 6 weeks, and it's pretty crazy. And here you see one of these camps up in 15,000 feet. So the people move up, they have to pay a fee if it's not right where they live. And here you see people on their knees looking, and of course the big question is, how sustainable is it? This is going now for how many years, and everybody's collecting. And in these areas, people told me, where there used to be like a spot where you could find 100 caterpillar fungus growing together, these spots are gone because, you know, they've been picked too intensely, and so there's no more spores coming in the environment. And now everybody has to walk further and further, and they find new areas where nobody looked before, you know, where you don't have the density anymore, but you still pull out. So the annual production figures, they don't show a collapse in the production. And so here I'm out with Worldwide Fund for Nature, and and talk to the local people about their understanding of it and how much would they support sustainable management. And basically everybody I talked to, once they understood the life cycle of caterpillar fungus and that they have seeds or spores, because for the Tibetans they're self-manifesting. They're not, they don't know about fungal spores. I mean, who does, right? So they said, wow, this lady here, Yabu, she's collecting since she was a child, and said, wow, why does nobody tell us that? This makes sense. Well, you should print a brochure. This should be on TV, I mean, that was her reaction when we told her about the life cycle and that we need to keep some spores in the environment. And here you see different stages of maturity of caterpillar fungus, and the highest value is before it sporulates. So as soon as it sporulates, the price goes down because there's not as much mycelium anymore in the larvae. It shifts the energy up into the fruiting process, and in the end, like this caterpillar, I mean, it's a larvae, but we all call it caterpillar. This larva here is very soft, and when it dries, it shrinks like to a quarter of its size. I mean, it's an aphrodisiac is one of the main things in China, right? And everything is about the size of the worm. So the bigger the worm, the bigger the price. Together, so that's why like the term caterpillar fungus is much better than just calling it cordyceps or Ophiocordyceps, because that's just a fungus. But in the Tibetan and the Asian or Chinese mind, it is really the caterpillar fungus, the caterpillar with the fruiting body. But often when the fruiting body is too long, they like it a short fruiting body, then they just snip it off. Nobody's checking, about, it's really all about the caterpillar. And the complex. Now here for sustainable management, once they're mature and they're sporulating, the value is really low. It's like a tenth of in prime condition. So this is an advantage. So what I'm working on is that the Tibetans realize we should sacrifice these old, overmature fungi and leave them in the ground for next year. And I mean, this is not asking much. This is maybe, because they keep collecting the last little dregs, and they could stop a week, 2 weeks earlier, sacrifice maybe 5% of their income, and contribute to sustainability in that way. If it's sufficient, who knows? But it's an easy approach, and it's worth a trial. In general, it is very resilient because it's been collected for hundreds of years and it's still around. The caterpillar is dead, and the fungus is an annual. But the caterpillar, it usually it's 4 years old when it gets infected. So here you see out of this National Geographic, and I felt them here as a scientific consultant. I didn't catch that one. I was more concerned about how they were drawing the fruiting body here, but that arrow should go right here. So from research in Thailand, we know that ants get infected, and when they get infected, within 4 days, the fungus takes over the ant. So to assume here now that it would be a year in the larvae, it doesn't make sense in this case, but we don't have clear research on that. So these spores probably hit the 4th year stage, and then and that's probably in the previous summer. Then there's a sclerosium built within the caterpillar, and then in spring, as soon as the first greening of the sedges happens, that's when the caterpillar fungus starts to grow, and out of the sclerosium it develops. And if it wasn't infected, it would turn into a ghost moth, and the ghost moths would lay some eggs. So that is the interrupted life cycle. And here there's some, WWF made some information material for local Tibetans, but it needs a little bit of adjustment. I mean, this is here supposedly, you might recognize that as a mycelium, but I don't know if a Tibetan nomad could get an idea out of what this stuff is here. And then of course there was Tibetan missing in a few places, but all these things are always done in Chinese and then at least translated into Tibetan. And here the price development. So in the last 10, 15 years, factor 10. So 1,000, maybe 14,000% increase in value. And a lot of it is differentiation in price for the top quality, because it's a total status symbol in China. So you have a successful business, especially, you first face our impermanence. We get old, we get sick, and so on, and you have money. you spend that on caterpillar fungus in China. That's what really helps you. That's good investment, because all the other stuff, you know, we die anyways and we have to leave it behind. But there you have a medicine that really energizes you, and so on is the Chinese belief. And there's some research of this on this energizing effect and so on. But here I worked with 2005, 2006 figures, published that in 2008. I calculated 40% of the rural cash income over the whole of the Tibetan Autonomous Region came from caterpillar fungus. And that included areas that don't have caterpillar fungus. And back then it was 8.5% of the GDP in Tibet. I mean, a mushroom, 8.5% of a GDP. And the prices have gone up since back then, and I looked a little bit in the prices in 2010 or 11 again, and it was still about the same. So really, I mean, no other place on this globe where a fungus contributes to an economy to this degree. And here's some prices, you know, for a kilogram, $80,000 in Shanghai. I mean, it's even gold went up like crazy, right? But caterpillar fungus kept up, and the top quality still outdoes gold. And here the production, and the main message is here. You see, I don't have figures after 2010. And you know, nobody did that. I mean, I was the first one who asked for these figures and put them in a graph, and so nobody in China published anything like that. And we went to the county offices and asked for these numbers, which were collected, which was already a miracle. And you know, one prefectural governor scolded his agricultural secretary. I mean, she was the secretary to the agricultural secretary. How come you never showed me these numbers? You know, I mean. It's like, I showed you the numbers, you have the numbers here. And he wanted to make the case that his subordinate was guilty that they never multiplied the value with the harvest and had these numbers. Anyways, you see, there's no collapse in production. There's variations in annual production as you would have it with any mushroom. And these are different prefectures out of the production in TAR, which is the Tibetan Autonomous Region. All these are basically Tibetan areas, but Tibet has been divided into 5 provinces. By the Chinese. So, you know, you could easily say 90% of the caterpillar fungus is collected in Tibetan cultural areas, which are labeled as such too in China. And no collapse, as some people claim. Science had this article quoting a Chinese entomologist who said we have only 10% of caterpillar that used to be around, and you know, that's bogus. I mean, it's the production is still high, and they still manage to extract, but they collect on a much bigger area, I'd say. So in '99, you know, people were just out there on the road, hardly anybody, you know, no motorcycles around. The price was a fraction of what it's now. One caterpillar fungus back then was maybe, you know, 25 cents, 50 cents. Now a piece can be, if it's normal size, $2, $3. If it's a little bigger, $20, $50, $60. I mean, just crazy. And then, you know, in 2010, all the dealers drive nice Beijing Jeeps or Japanese cars and nicely dressed. And I mean, hundreds of thousands of yuan go back and forth each day, $10,000 of dollars. The amounts involved are just mind-boggling. And here, like this guy with his bag here, so that was 2 kg, $24,000. You know, in a little, just crazy. And there, here, size comparison. So here you have top quality when you have about 700 to 800 Yartsagumbu per pound. That would fetch here like $25,000. And if you have the smallest size, where you have 2,000 to 3,000 per pound, then you would get about $3,000. So you see the differences in price based on size. Okay, and then here you see all, you know, the motorcycles. There was a Buddhist teaching, and then our cell phones don't work anymore, because when the Tibetans come together, the Chinese just switch off the signal, you know. Sorry guys, you don't need phone, you know, we don't trust you. So let's just switch off the cell phones while you gather. And then a lot of the money is given to the monasteries. You know, Tibetans is a very spiritual culture, and put up these prayer flags. And this, for example, this is again this I showed you in the mushroom, and that's the symbol for the original purity of the mind. You know, it doesn't matter animal, human, male, female, the mind in its originality is pure. there is no stain, and so this is our Buddha nature. And and then the original sin in Buddhism is distraction. You got distracted from your original nature. That's why you end up in a human body, and you have to deal with all these troubles of human existence, because you just got distracted looking at a mushroom instead of realizing your pure awareness. Anyway, so then here you see these incredible new temples they build. I mean, for me, it's so tacky, it's all the gold and inside. And this is a mandala, a three-dimensional mandala. You see a painting of a mandala? Well, that's two-dimensional. That's what is painted in a mandala. In the center is the deity that is a symbol for your enlightened mind. And now you look in the background, and this is the mandala of Padmasambhava. Look what they're building there. So this is a monastery up in 12,400 feet, and the lamas there, they have like 4 reincarnated teachers there, which usually, each monastery at this point has its reincarnated lamas, and of course we're all reincarnated, but who knows what we were in our last lives, right? So these supposedly are the returning teachers, and they have some wealthy Chinese students who, make millions on the coast, and then they bring it up there, and I mean, look at that complex they're building up. It looks like a French ski station, And these are retreat huts, so you sit in there and you meditate and you enjoy the mountain view, and you got to be fed. And I don't know if this will be all Chinese sitting up there meditating, but there's a high rate of Chinese students. There's a generation of Tibetan lamas who explain Buddhism in Chinese, and it really, this is one of the hope for Tibet, that there is Chinese who say, hey guys, come on, what we're doing up there is really not all right. Let's work with these people. Let's appreciate what they have. And yes, they might materialistic been not top-notch, but they spent the last 1,500 years looking at the mind and have a science of the mind which really is something worth to preserve. And then Chinatown. So down in the valleys, there is there used to be Tibetan villages too. There you see a couple old houses here, but these are the administrative centers, the county town, and the Chinese always like to live down where it's warm. This is the town of Beiyou, and so that's 3 days drive from Chengdu. That's really remote. There's not so many Chinese in there anymore, but still, as soon as there's business, county town, the Chinese come in, live there, but they're not allowed to pick caterpillar fungus or matsutake because they're not residents. So there's really an advantage for the Tibetans, and nobody working in the government sector is allowed to pick caterpillar fungus, because the schools close at that season because there's no kids. They're all collecting. Kids have sharp eyes. They're close to the ground. The whole family is up there. So, it's really impacted, incredible impact. So, morels I mentioned, and morels, the name is cuckoo shamu. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The cuckoo bird comes at the same time back to Tibet when the morels pop. And that goes into the international market, and this year you saw the morel prices go up for the first time here in this country. And what happened is, the Chinese quit exporting. They're eating them themselves now. So, and then people collect the hawkwing, sarcodon, and this is the mushroom collected by the highest tonnage, but its value is about 30 cents a pound, 40 cents a pound. So as soon as something hits the international market, the price goes up by like factor 10. What's locally consumed has a much lower price, or what's even just consumed in China. And I wouldn't pay the money I pay for a bolete or for a matsutake for hawkwing in the first place, but it's a very popular edible mushroom, and you see the amounts produced, and the Tibetans know it as shadra, which means deer mushroom, and you look at the teeth, it looks pretty much like a deer fur, so pretty good name. And then we find this chicken of the woods, and it melted on our tongues. I never ate any better sulfur shelf. And here, matsutake, secondary coppice managed oak forest. So only in Tibet the matsutake is associated with evergreen oaks. Nowhere else. It's otherwise a conifer associate. But on the Tibetan plateau, it jumped from the pine to the oak trees. So you got to have oak forest. And wherever it's collected, there's people in the forest. Everybody who can in the summer goes out, collects. This is Drolma again, who we stayed with in her farmhouse, and my Tibetan friend made some sexual innuendo, as it's unavoidable, and then everybody giggles. And oh, here we are cooking the matsutake, and this is Maxine, you might know, she's here. And we cook this matsutake, and my favorite is to steam it in soy sauce, sake, and a little bit of butter. And well, sake we didn't have, soy sauce we had, so we took some red wine and added a tiny bit of sugar and steamed it, and then we all tried and loved it, and then it fell on the ground. When we were trying to put it in a nice pot, the handle fell off, and the whole stuff was on the ground. And my rule usually at home, yeah, I can eat from my floor, but when I travel, it's on the ground, it's gone. Now I thought, oh, too bad. Maybe I pick just the things up that don't touch the ground, that sit on the other mushrooms. The whole group of 8, 9 Westerners said, pick it up, pick it up. So I picked up the whole mushroom from the floor, and look at these floors, how black they are. This is soot and ash, you know, from not centuries, but decades. And I couldn't believe it, that everybody said, pick it up. And then we put it back in the pot, added a little bit more wine and water, sterilized the whole thing, and ate it all. Here on the road, you know, accident, we get stuck. That was last year, and we talked to these people. Turns out he spoke well English, and the next day we go with the matsutake hunting, get invited for tea, and I mean, people are so happy to meet us. They know, you know, Westerners appreciate Tibetan culture, they appreciate the Dalai Lama, so we get received so warmly everywhere. And that was then the matsutake hunt down there, the road where we met and came back the next day and found some kind of porcini, and everybody was picking in the forest matsutake. Here, this guy planted some for us, pretending they had grown there, but I could tell. Not that I don't ever plant mushrooms for pictures, but you know, he put that, come here, and then, you know, showed us the matsutake, but you know, it was planted. And these guys, they were done picking. That was maybe 4 p.m. or so, and he was waiting for his buddy who was getting the motorcycle. 1 day of matsutake picking. So, I mean, what a load. So these are all number ones. This is the highest price, so maybe 1 pound, $8 or so. And what is that, 40 pounds easily or something like that, 30 pounds? That's a really good howl. And that's their camp. You know, there used to be a forest, and now the forest has been used for heating, and they all put up their structures here, and then each day venture out in the forest and put up these temporary shelters. You know, the hailstorm comes, it's stormy, and I mean, it's wild that they picked this really windy pass up there and not a different spot. But, you know, Tibetans are used to be out in the elements, and I mean, the kids running around half naked in a freezing morning or so, you know, it's such hardy people. And here for comparison, you see the matsutake area, much smaller than the caterpillar fungus area. And in regard of value, maybe, you know, caterpillar fungus is probably 95% of the fungal value generated in Tibet. I mean, matsutake makes a lot of money, and some villages only got electricity to to produce ice for transport. You know, like the first hydroelectric station was built to produce ice for matsutake transport. And the Tibetan name Beshing Shamu or Besha means oak mushroom. And the Chinese name Sorong means pine fluff. And when I told Chinese that the pine mushroom grows with oaks, they couldn't believe it, because their idea is the matsutake taste is the resin of the pine. That's the taste in the matsutake. The pine injects its resin in the matsutake, that makes the taste, and suddenly telling them they're not associated with pines up there, it's just like, no, this can't be. Then they wouldn't taste like they taste. So here we went up to a sacred mountain, and that year, last year, it rained quite a bit at some point, and we got stuck for a day in a town because the roads were flooded and landslides. But then they let us, we use little SUVs, and we could leave town while the buses and the trucks got stuck for a week. So all the tourist buses couldn't go anymore. So this area, which is very famous in China, Yading, in Daocheng country, the tourist buses didn't make it anymore. But also the gas trucks didn't make it anymore. So it was like, first they would give us only, I don't know, 10 liters or something like that. And then, you know, then they brought in the gas from Yunnan, not from Sichuan. And so we had enough gas to leave. But it was like, well, great, we are here alone. And then, but there's no gas either, you know. And here, prayer flags, you know, the wind is is spreading the prayers for the benefit of all sentient beings, all these prayers. And there's a monastery up there, but that monastery is pretty much in disrepair, and now it's more a tourist excursion. Here in the back you see one of these 6,000 meter peaks. I think it's 19,900 or something. Really incredible mountains and quite tucked away. High altitude lake, and that was in the morning. You know, these three mountains, there's three mountains of that height, and they are the three: wisdom, compassion, and energy. And that was driving cordyceps season. So I usually do two tours a year. One is cordyceps season, morel and cordyceps fruit in late May, early June. And then in July, August, it's the matsutake and all the other, the boletes and all the other mushrooms. And there was this incredible rainbow, and you see the rhododendron flowering in the remnants of the spruce fir forest. And the Tibetans love rainbows because they say the best image of our energy body is there's a spherical rainbow. You've seen sometimes when you look out of an airplane and you see the reflection of this sphere of rainbow in the clouds. So they used to climb mountains to get that view. We see it when we fly around, and they say that's how our energy body, our aura looks. So there's the rainbow is always revered as that symbol. Okay, after these words of wisdom comes the commercials. I have these Pacific Northwest and California edibles, fold-outs. So this is no profound mycology, but you get a nice overview for all the edibles in these areas. And if you have friends or relatives out there and you need a well-priced Christmas present, just $8, I have them with me. And then I have these T-shirts that say Shamu Rinpoche, and Shamu is the mushroom, and Rinpoche means precious. So it's you have the five precious mushrooms in Tibet: boletes, caterpillar fungus, morels, matsutake, and chanterelles. And but it's a pun. It's precious mushrooms, or it's the mushroom guru, because Rinpoche is always the title for a Buddhist teacher. But there is no mushroom Rinpoche out there yet. So Shamu Rinpoche on the back, you have that I'd rather be mushrooming, no more knives, just getting a new load, all gone. And so the fungal floral tour will be in 2014, will be July, mid of July, 15th or 20th, something like that, and then 2 weeks. I always do 2 weeks. It's just a good time to travel together, and you get into remote areas and can come out. And the cordyceps tour is the same dates as it was this year. And then the Bolivia tour with Larry, it's going to be February 2nd to February 15th. And so far we have 4 or 5 people signed up, and usually we're 8 or 10 people. And then there's Larry and me guiding, and then in the jungle lodges we have local guides. And if you we don't just look at mushrooms, all these places. I mean, there's so much more to see, but we take our days where it's really about mushrooms. And then for the first time, I have 2 things next year. I go to Colombia last week of March and first week of April. And, in the oak, there's still oak forests down in Colombia. So you have all these oak associates, chanterelles and boletes and so on. And then where the tropical rainforest hits the Pacific, there's still primary forest right on the coast. So that's the 2 main areas, and a coffee farm. And then in January, I do a 4-day tour for the Oregon Truffle Fest. They asked me if I would do a tour for them, and we meet Wednesday in Portland, and then we do fancy mushroom dinners and vineyards and olive groves and stuff like that, and then the Oregon Truffle Fest. And I think I have 3 or 4 places left still. And that's all on my webpage, and I have a little list if you want to leave your email, and then I update you, and I have little postcards with the dates over there. And also Mushroaming is my webpage, where I have surely over 1,000 images from all around the world from these travels. And then I have a cordyceps blog, Ophiocordyceps.com. And on Facebook, you don't see so many. You might see that family picture because everybody has a mushroom on their shirts. But otherwise, just mushrooms and flowers and stuff like that. And you can connect with me that way. So thank you, the NAMA people, everybody who has organized, especially Jay and all the other volunteers. And thank you so much for coming.